مساء الخير وأهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من برنامج واشنطن أونلاين. معي أنا هديل عويس على شبكة نورث بريس. إلى ماذا سيؤدي التصعيد الروسي المتكرر ضد الطيران الأمريكي في الشمال السوري؟ هل ستختار الولايات المتحدة التصعيد لتكون سوريا بذلك ساحة المواجهة الجديدة بين روسيا والولايات المتحدة؟ وما الذي عناه فيصل المقداد وزير الخارجية السوري بحديثه عن ضرورة واقتراب انسحاب الولايات المتحدة من سوريا؟ هذا ما أبحثه في حلقة اليوم من برنامج واشنطن أونلاين، وضيوفي لهذه الحلقة هما السيد ديفيد دروش العقيد الأمريكي المتقاعد، ينضم إلينا من العاصمة الأمريكية واشنطن. ابقوا معنا لمتابعة هذه الحلقة. أهلا وسهلا بك سيد ديفيد. بعد سنوات من سياسة تجنب المواجهة أو الاشتباك بين القوات الروسية والأمريكية، هناك اليوم تحرش متعمد من قبل المسيرات الروسية بالطائرات الأمريكية بالوجود الأمريكي عموما في الشمال السوري. ما الجديد؟ ما الذي يحدث اليوم؟
Well, there's a couple things. First off, there's sort of a global pushing back against U.S. drones. So the Russians downed a U.S. drone in the Black Sea a few years ago. The Iranians downed a drone in the Strait of Hormuz. And we're seeing Chinese harassment of drones as well in the South China Sea and other places. So I think what's happening is countries are realizing that the United States to date has not treated an attack on a drone the same as an attack on a manned aircraft, and they're sort of testing the limits of what they can do to interfere with U.S. unmanned surveillance to do that. That's the global issue. The regional issue is the Russians and the Iranians want us out of Syria, full stop. And everything they can do to make it difficult for us, they will do. And they're trying to calibrate the level that they can harass U.S. forces that won't elicit a violent response. So this is part of that.
إلى أي مدى هناك رغبة واستعداد أمريكي للمواجهة والتصعيد مع روسيا، مع إيران، حتى مع دمشق التي تتحدث عن ضرورة انسحاب فوري للولايات المتحدة من شمال سوريا؟ إلى أي مدى أمريكا مستعدة لبذل الجهد وربما أرواح أيضا من الجيش الأمريكي لكي تدافع وتتمسك بوجودها في شمال سوريا؟
Yeah, good question. So the Assad regime and its Iranian and Russian sponsors have long said that the U.S. presence in Syria is illegal and that the United States should leave. The problem is, the United States didn't intervene in Syria to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. We intervened when an American citizen who was held by Daesh was executed, and we intervened to defeat Daesh. It wasn't the Russians, the Iranians, or the Syrians that, conducted the battle in Raqqa. It was the Americans and our partners. But having done that, what we have is a situation where we have a primarily Kurdish group that has fought against Daesh, that provided the bulk of the manpower against Daesh, and holds all these Daesh prisoners. They're dependent on U.S. support, so we can't leave them. And indeed, we had a Secretary of Defense resign in protest when we agreed to remove our support for part of this predominantly Kurdish entity in Western Syria. We have Jordanian partners down in the south along Tanf who are concerned that the war will cross the border. And so if we leave the position in Tanf, our Jordanian partners are very concerned. And then we're worried about the establishment of a direct Iranian overland route from Iran across Iraq, much of which they control, through Syria, much of which they control, to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we have a lot of bad things that happen if the United States were to leave, and we're worried that Daesh will reestablish itself because the Bashar al-Assad regime is basically incapable of ruling all of Syria. They've proven that. And, they're a religious minority. Most of the opposition to them is the Sunni majority of Syria, which is where Daesh would draw its recruiting base from. So we have a lot of bad things that would happen if we leave, but we don't have a comprehensive vision for what we want to have happen in Syria. We're really in a difficult spot there.
نعم فعلا سيد ديفيد، كنت أريد أن أسأل عن هذه الاستراتيجية السياسية الغائبة. يعني هناك وجود أمريكي اليوم يمنع اقتراب أي نفوذ إيراني أو تركي أو حتى نفوذ تابع لنظام الأسد أو روسيا من مناطق تهم الولايات المتحدة في الشمال السوري، تمنع عودة تنظيم داعش. ولكن هل هناك هدف محدد؟ هل هناك استراتيجية قادرة على إيصال الولايات المتحدة إلى منع كل هذه العوامل من من زعزعة الاستقرار في الشمال السوري، حتى لو كان هناك قرار سياسي بالابتعاد عسكريا من قبل الولايات المتحدة عن المنطقة؟
Yeah, I don't think there is. I haven't seen any indication of a comprehensive strategy for Syria. What I've seen is, well, we're doing this, and if we don't do this, something bad will happen. And that policy is the same under Obama, under Trump, under Biden. So, we're able to do it because our numbers on the forces are relatively small, probably about 900. They tend to be National Guardsmen. We're not taking casualties. It's a relatively low cost operation to prevent, I mean, when Daesh took over Western Syria and then it spread into Iraq, that was a big effort by the United States. So it's probably cost efficient, but I think the Iranian and Russian calculus, they're trying to inflict casualties on us. And they're trying to do it in a manner that would be difficult to attribute through by building local proxy forces. Their calculus is if they can inflict a significant number of casualties on the United States, people in the U.S. will say, "What are we in Syria for?" And the movement will rise to leave. So part of this is they have to blind our observation from the air. When the Russians tried to attack the Conoco plant, the Wagner Group, we were able to notice where they were from the air and apply devastating artillery and air fire against them. We killed between 189 and 600 Russians. We still don't know how many. They don't want that to happen again, and they realize that the first part of that is to blind us to what's going on in Syria. So this is kind of part of that.
ديفيد، هناك انزعاج من شركاء الولايات المتحدة على الأرض في شمال شرق سوريا، قوات سوريا الديمقراطية، من التصعيد التركي المتكرر الذي لا يواجه بأي ردود فعل أمريكية تحد من هذا التصعيد أو توقف هذا التصعيد. ما هي الاستراتيجية القادرة على إبقاء علاقة متوازنة مع تركيا، ولكن أيضا ضمان عدم قيام تركيا بأي تحركات مزعزعة لاستقرار شمال شرق سوريا؟
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. So I've just listed all the problems we have with our continued presence in Syria, and I didn't mention the Turkey issue, and that's actually one of the biggest ones because the people who we relied on, who did the hard work of fighting to defeat Daesh, who went house to house in Raqqa, that was the Syrian Democratic Forces, and they're overwhelmingly Kurdish. And our NATO ally, whose support is critical for our presence in the Black Sea, for many of our operations in support of Ukraine, resisting Russian colonialism, and in Turkey, they regard the Syrian Democratic Forces as just another name for, the PKK, which is recognized by the United States and other countries as a terrorist group. So we've got a real problem there. And it's hard to deal with because Turkey is dealt with as part of U.S. European Command out of Stuttgart, and Syria is dealt with as part of U.S. Central Command in Florida. So you have different groups of the U.S. government dealing with this problem. But Turkey's not satisfied with that. And it's a long-running irritant. But again, I don't see a way out. I mean, if we were to withdraw support for the Syrian Democratic Forces, first thing is we'd probably see Iranian-based groups in support of, with the sanction of Bashar al-Assad, move in and do what they've done in the Sunni heartlands west of Damascus, which is ethnically cleanse Sunni Arabs, replace them with Shia militiamen from Lebanon, from Iraq. And we'd probably see all the Daesh prisoners removed there or massacred. And I think that we'd see some sort of Sunni insurrection, which is what Daesh was, which, given the weakness of the Syrian state and the corruptness of the Syrian state, which is focused primarily on producing Captagon, there's a real possibility that something like the Islamic State would reestablish itself in Syria. It's a real problem.
وأخيرا سيد ديفيد، على ما يبدو هناك اليوم حلف يحاول أن يقف متماسكا لمواجهة الوجود الأمريكي في شمال شرق سوريا، وأهم القوى في هذا الحلف هما روسيا وإيران. إلى أي مدى تنسجم مصالح كل من روسيا وإيران على الأراضي السورية؟ ألا يوجد تناقض بين مصالح روسيا وإيران؟
Good question. So what we've seen is that Iran, well, first off, let's talk about the Syrian army to start off with. They're basically useless. Their only successful actions have been against civilians. By and large, what they do is they set up static checkpoints where they shake down travelers. And then the 4th Division of the Syrian army, their best army, is the largest producer of Captagon in the world. So the Syrian army is militarily irrelevant. The fighting has generally been done in Syria by Iranian officered and directed militias drawn from elsewhere, drawn from Iraq, drawn from Lebanon, but under Iranian officership and sponsorship. And then the air power, some of the indirect power, and occasional raids, most notably in Tadmor, Palmyra, is conducted by Russian forces. What we have here is an alliance of convenience. They're brought together by the fact that they hate us, but they don't really like each other in the abstract. If there were no United States, they'd be at each other's throat. The Soviet Union occupied the northern half of Iran during World War II, and unlike the UK in the south, did not want to leave. The United States had to force them to leave. They have different motives. They've loaned a lot of money to Syria that they're not going to get back. And so what you see are a lot of private military organizations trying to extract wealth from the Syrian state. But there's not a coherent natural alliance. What you're seeing is an alliance of convenience that's aimed at basically harassing the United States until it leaves.
شكرا جزيلا لك ضيفي السيد ديفيد ديروش العقيد السابق في الجيش الأمريكي، كنت معنا من واشنطن. وفي الختام شكرا لكل من تابع حلقة اليوم من واشنطن أونلاين. ألقاكم في حلقة جديدة الأسبوع المقبل، إلى اللقاء.